In the harsh expanse of the 1870s Texas frontier, Sarah Mitchell's world shatters when marauders strike her homestead, leaving her a widow and captive. Bound and facing a fate worse than death, she finds an unlikely savior in Rising Wolf, a Comanche warrior whose compassion defies the brutal customs of his tribe. Under the cover of darkness, he risks everything to free her, setting in motion a dangerous journey across treacherous lands. As they navigate the perilous terrain between two worlds, something unexpected blossoms, a connection that transcends the bitter hatred between their peoples. But with vengeful warriors in pursuit and cultural barriers that seem insurmountable, can love truly bridge the divide between two worlds so long at war? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather-bound Bible lay open on the rough-hewn table, its gilt-edged pages catching the early morning light. Sarah Mitchell's fingers traced the familiar family records within, births, deaths, marriages recorded in careful script. Her own wedding date, barely 2 years past, was written in Thomas's steady hand. The book had traveled with her family from Virginia, carrying their history across mountains and prairies to this remote corner of Texas. Dawn painted the modest homestead in soft gold. Sarah tucked a strand of honey-brown hair behind her ear as she kneaded bread dough, humming an old hymn. At 22, she'd grown into the role of frontier wife with quiet determination. The cabin Thomas built with his own hands had become home, their small farm slowly transforming the wild land into something civilized. "Smells like heaven itself," Thomas said, ducking through the doorway. His tall frame cast a shadow across the kitchen, and Sarah smiled at the sight of him, shirt already damp with honest work, dark hair tousled by the morning wind. "Just trying to keep up with your appetite," she teased, reaching for the coffee pot. The familiar routine of their mornings grounded her, even here at the edge of civilization. Thomas wrapped his arms around her waist, breathing in the scent of fresh bread and clean cotton. "Don't know what I did to deserve you." "Probably something terrible," Sarah laughed, but leaned into his embrace. These quiet moments were precious, stolen between the endless tasks that frontier life demanded. Through the window, their small herd of cattle grazed in the distance. 2 years of backbreaking work had carved this place from the wilderness. It wasn't much compared to her family's Virginia farm, but it was theirs, their future. The first sign something was wrong was the way the cattle bunched together, moving nervously. Thomas noticed it too, his body tensing against hers. "Get the rifle," he said quietly, all warmth gone from his voice. "Bar the door behind me." "Thomas." "Do it, Sarah." He was already moving, reaching for his own weapon. "If anything happens, don't." She grabbed his arm. "Don't say it." He kissed her hard, then was gone. Sarah's hands shook as she lifted the heavy rifle from its pegs, watching through the window as Thomas crossed the yard. The morning's peace shattered like glass as the first shots rang out. They came from all directions, painted warriors on horseback, moving faster than Sarah's terrified mind could process. Thomas fired, and one rider fell, then another. But there were too many. Sarah's own shot went wide as she fired through the window. She'd been practicing, determined to be useful, but now her hands wouldn't stop trembling. She watched in horror as a warrior's lance found its mark. Thomas fell like a puppet with cut strings. The scream tore from her throat unbidden. She fired again and again until the rifle clicked empty. Then they were at the door, wood splintering under heavy blows. Sarah backed away, searching desperately for more ammunition. The Bible still lay open on the table, pages fluttering in the wind from the broken window. As the door gave way, a spray of blood marred the sacred text. Her blood or theirs, she would never know. Rough hands seized her. Sarah fought like a wildcat, all frontier propriety forgotten as she clawed and kicked. A sharp blow to the head made the world spin. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was Thomas's body in the yard, and a single warrior who watched from the tree line, separate from the others. Even through her fading vision, his stillness set him apart. When consciousness returned, Sarah found herself bound and thrown across a horse like so much plunder. The gentle morning had become a nightmare under the fierce Texas sun. Her captors spoke in a language she didn't understand, their voices harsh with laughter that made her skin crawl. Every bump and jar of the horse's movement was agony against her bruised ribs. Through swollen eyes, she caught glimpses of the quiet warrior following at a distance. Unlike the others, his face wasn't painted for war. Once, when the party stopped to water their horses, she saw him watching her with an expression that might have been pity. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed. The familiar words of scripture fell, silently from her lips, a lifeline to the world that had existed only hours ago. The Bible lay behind them now, blood-stained and abandoned like everything else she had loved. But its words remained, a reminder of who she was, even as that life crumbled to ashes behind them. Night was falling when they made camp. Sarah's hands were numb from the ropes, her throat raw with unshed tears. She knew what fate awaited captured white women. The stories were whispered around frontier fires, stories that ended in death, if they were lucky. As darkness claimed the land, Sarah Mitchell prepared herself to die. She would not give them the satisfaction of breaking her first. Rising Wolf's medicine pouch hung heavy against his chest as he watched the camp settle into darkness. Within its worn leather confines lay the sacred objects that had guided him since his vision quest. A hawk's feather for clarity, a river stone for strength, a scrap of lightning-struck wood for transformation. Tonight, they seemed to weigh more than usual, as if bearing the burden of his thoughts. The white woman lay bound near the main fire, her face streaked with dirt and dried blood. The others paid her little mind now. She was just another prize from a successful raid, no different from the horses and weapons they'd taken. But Rising Wolf had seen something in her eyes during the attack, not just fear, but a fierce determination that reminded him of his sister before the soldiers came. He touched the medicine pouch, remembering Morning Star's final words. Not all spirits walk the same path to wisdom. She had been the one to give him his name, seeing in him a warrior who would rise above the darkness. Before the fever took her, she had made him promise to honor that name. The raiders' leader, Black Horse, approached with a swagger that came from too much stolen whiskey. "The woman is strong," he said in Comanche. "She'll fetch a good price from the Mexicans." Rising Wolf's hand tightened on his knife hilt. "She is someone's morning star," he replied quietly. Black Horse spat into the fire. "You've gone soft, brother. Too many winters listening to the peace chiefs." He leaned closer, whiskey sour breath hot in the night air. "Or perhaps you want her for yourself?" "I want what is best for our people." "And what is that?" "To bow before the white man's settlements until we're nothing but beggars in our own lands?" Black Horse gestured at the distant horizon. "Every moon brings more of them, building their fences, killing our buffalo. This is how we survive." But Rising Wolf remembered other things. Trading parties where goods flowed freely between peoples, peace councils where wisdom was shared like water. His grandfather had spoken of such times before hatred had poisoned both sides. The medicine pouch seemed to pulse against his chest. He had earned his place among the warriors, but more and more the old ways felt hollow. Each raid left him feeling further from the path the spirits had shown him. He watched as Sarah Mitchell shifted in her bonds, refusing to cry out despite her obvious pain. In the firelight, he could see the silver cross that hung from her neck. Not so different from his own sacred tokens. Both were bridges to the spirit world, just viewed through different eyes. A plan began to form in his mind, dangerous as a prairie fire. The woman's death or enslavement would solve nothing. It would only feed the cycle of vengeance that was destroying both peoples. But her rescue, that could be a spark of something different. Rising Wolf moved away from the fire, checking his weapons with practiced hands. His finest horse, a pintoed mare swift as wind, was tethered at the edge of camp. He had earned her on his first raid, but tonight she would serve a different purpose. As the moon rose, he made his preparations quietly. Extra water, dried meat, a spare blanket, all could be explained away if discovered. The hardest part was waiting, watching the fires die down as the raiders succumbed one by one to exhaustion and whiskey. His medicine pouch offered one last gift, crushed herbs that, when burned, would make the guards' eyes heavy. Rising Wolf had learned their secrets from an old medicine woman who believed in building bridges, not burning them. As he worked, he felt his sister's presence stronger than ever. Morning Star had died, believing in a better way. Perhaps this was his chance to honor that belief, to be the rising wolf she had seen in him, rather than the predator others wished him to be. The night grew deeper. Soon it would be time. Rising, Wolf sent a silent prayer to the spirits of his ancestors, asking not for victory in battle, but for the courage to do what he knew was right. The medicine pouch grew lighter against his chest, as if approving his choice. He was no longer just a warrior of his people. Tonight, he would become something more. A bridge between worlds, a keeper of hope. Even if it cost him everything, he would show that there was another way. Sarah's wrists burned where the rawhide bonds cut into her flesh. Each subtle movement was a fresh reminder of her captivity, the rough ropes an ever-present torment. She had spent hours testing them, searching for any weakness. But her captors knew their craft all too well. The camp had grown quiet, save for the snores of drunken warriors and the soft pop of dying fires. A sliver of moon cast weak light across the sleeping forms. Sarah forced herself to stay awake, knowing that dawn would bring fresh horrors. They had been discussing her fate in their language, but their crude gestures made their intentions clear. Enough! A shadow detached itself from the darkness. Sarah's heart thundered in her chest as she recognized the warrior who had watched from the tree line, the one who hadn't participated in the raid. He moved with the silence of a hunting cat, each step precisely placed. When he knelt beside her, Sarah steeled herself for the worst. Instead, his hands went to her bonds, working at the knots with careful fingers. His face was close enough that she could see the concern in his eyes. "Be still," he whispered in badly accented English. "Make no sound." The ropes fell away. Blood rushed painfully back into Sarah's numbed hands, but she bit back a whimper. The warrior, her rescuer, helped her to her feet with surprising gentleness. When her legs threatened to buckle, his strong grip kept her upright. They moved through the camp like ghosts. Sarah's heart nearly stopped when one of the sleeping raiders shifted and muttered, but her companion's steady presence kept her moving. At the edge of camp, a painted horse waited, already saddled. The warrior helped her mount, then swung up behind her with fluid grace. Sarah's entire body tensed at the intimate contact, years of propriety warring with the necessity of survival. His arms bracketed her as he took up the reins, and she caught the scent of sage and leather from his clothes. "I am Rising Wolf," he murmured, barely a breath against her ear. "Trust me now, or we both die." The horse moved out at a walk, each hoof placement carefully chosen to minimize sound. Sarah hardly dared breathe until the camp was lost to darkness behind them. Only then did Rising Wolf nudge their mount into a faster pace. They rode hard through the night, the horse's sure feet finding paths invisible to Sarah's eyes. Her rescuer sat straight and alert, occasionally turning to scan their back trail. Every part of Sarah's body ached, but she forced herself to stay focused. This might be her only chance at freedom. Dawn was a growing threat in the east when Rising Wolf finally reined in beside a shallow stream. He dismounted smoothly and reached up to help Sarah down. Her legs nearly betrayed her again, but his strong hands steadied her. "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Why help me?" Rising Wolf busied himself checking the horse, but his voice was thoughtful when he replied. "Not all paths lead to war. He pulled a water skin from his saddlebags and offered it to her. Sarah drank gratefully, watching him over the rim. In the growing light, she could see him more clearly, younger than she'd first thought, with eyes that held more wisdom than violence. "They will follow," he said, glancing back the way they'd come. "I know." Sarah squared her shoulders, pushing away exhaustion and fear. "What do we do?" A ghost of a smile touched Rising Wolf's lips. "We run, we hide, we survive." He touched the medicine pouch at his chest. "The spirits have shown this path. Now we must be brave enough to walk it." The sound of distant hoofbeats shattered the morning peace. Rising Wolf's expression hardened as he helped Sarah back onto the horse. The bonds that had secured her lay miles behind them now, but Sarah knew they had only traded one kind of danger for another. As they rode out, she sent up a silent prayer, not for herself, but for the warrior who had risked everything to save her. Sarah's fingers traced the delicate cameo brooch pinned to her dress, her mother's final gift before she'd left Virginia. The carved ivory face seemed to watch her with quiet judgment as she sat across the small fire from a Comanche warrior. How far she'd come from the proper life she'd been raised to lead. "You should sleep," Rising Wolf said, breaking the tense silence. They had found shelter in a shallow cave after hours of hard riding, the horse exhausted and their pursuers temporarily lost in the twisted maze of canyons. "I can't." Sarah's hand moved from the cameo to her throat, where phantom bonds still seemed to bite. "Every time I close my eyes," he nodded, understanding in his dark eyes, "the first kill is hardest to forget. I've never—" Sarah swallowed hard. "Thomas was the first person I ever saw die. Your man fought well." Rising Wolf's voice held genuine respect. "He died protecting what he loved. Among my people there is no better death." Tears threatened, but Sarah forced them back. "Your people killed him." "Yes." He didn't try to deny it or defend the action. "The world is not simple, white woman. Good and evil do not wear different colors." Sarah clutched the cameo tighter, its familiar edges grounding her. "My name is Sarah," she said finally. "If we're going to die together, you should at least know my name." A ghost of a smile touched Rising Wolf's lips. "Sarah." He tested the name carefully. "I do not plan to die." "No, what do you plan?" He fed another small branch to their carefully shielded fire. "To show another way. Too much blood has been spilled by both sides. The spirits say there must be a bridge. And I'm your bridge?" Sarah couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "You are—" He paused, searching for the right words in English. "A beginning, a chance." The night wind moaned through the canyon, carrying the distant howl of wolves. Sarah shivered, and Rising Wolf silently offered her his blanket. She hesitated only a moment before accepting it. "Tell me about your home," he said, as she wrapped herself in the rough wool that smelled of sage and horse. Sarah's hand went back to the cameo. "Virginia, green hills, civilized towns. My father was a doctor. He wanted me to marry a lawyer or businessman, stay close to home." She gave a hollow laugh. "Instead, I fell in love with a farmer with Western dreams. And now I have nothing." The truth of it hit her fresh. No home, no husband, no future. Rising Wolf was quiet for a long moment. "The buffalo does not look back to where it has grazed, only forward to new grass." He touched his medicine pouch. "The spirits have given you a new path. Perhaps it leads somewhere you could not see before." Sarah studied him in the firelight. Earlier, running on fear and desperation, she hadn't really looked at her rescuer. Now she saw the intelligence in his eyes, the quiet strength in his bearing. He was younger than she'd first thought, probably close to her own age. "Why did you really help me?" she asked. His hand remained on the medicine pouch. "I had a sister, Morning Star. She believed there could be peace between our peoples." Pain flickered across his features. "White soldiers killed her 3 winters ago. I'm sorry. As am I for your man." He met her eyes. "The cycle must end somewhere, Sarah. Of Virginia. Why not with us?" The cameo felt heavier against her breast. It represented everything she'd been taught to value: civilization, propriety, the proper order of things. Yet here she was, sharing a fire with a savage who spoke of peace and showed more honor than the supposed civilized men who'd tried to buy her hand in Virginia. "Get some rest," Rising Wolf said gently. "Tomorrow will be hard riding." Sarah lay down, still wrapped in his blanket. The cameo pressed against her heart, a reminder of the world she'd left behind. As sleep finally claimed her, she wondered if perhaps Rising Wolf was right. Perhaps this was a new path, one that led somewhere she never could have imagined in her old life. Dawn painted the canyon walls blood red as Rising Wolf studied the tracking totem he'd found, a small bundle of feathers and leather left by their pursuers. His expression grew grave as he decoded its meaning. "Black Horse leads them," he said, tucking the totem into his medicine pouch. "He is like a wolf with a blood scent. He will not stop." Sarah stood beside the painted horse, her skirts torn and dirty from their flight. "How many follow?" 8 warriors. Rising Wolf's eyes scanned the horizon, all angry, all hungry for blood. The morning wind carried the distant cry of a hawk. Sarah watched as Rising Wolf's head tilted, reading messages in the sound that she couldn't comprehend. In just 2 days, she'd begun to see how much she'd never understood about his people's connection to the land. "We must split the trail," he said finally. "Make them choose which path to follow." Sarah's heart clenched. "You're leaving me?" "No." The firmness of his response surprised them both. "But they must believe we have separated. Watch now. I will show you how to deceive those who hunt us." Over the next hour, Rising Wolf taught her the art of false trails. Sarah watched in fascination as he scattered horsehair in one direction, laid careful tracks in another, and used a branch to sweep away their true path. "Your people taught you this?" she asked as they worked. A rare smile touched his lips. "My father was our tribe's greatest hunter," he said. "Tracking was like reading a story written in earth and air." The smile faded. "Before the fever took him." Sarah recognized the grief in his voice. "My mother died of fever too, in Virginia, before we came west." Her hand went to the cameo. "Sometimes I think she knew I'd need her strength out here." Rising Wolf touched his medicine pouch in unconscious mirror of her gesture. "The dead walk with us. Their strength becomes our strength." A sound caught his attention, distant but clear to his trained ear. "Horses, coming fast." He grabbed Sarah's arm. "Now we run." They mounted quickly, Sarah no longer hesitating to press close against him as the horse carried them deeper into the maze of canyons. Rising Wolf rode with confident skill, taking paths that seemed impossible until they were through them. Behind them, war cries echoed off the stone walls. Sarah's heart pounded, but her fear was different now. Not the blind terror of her capture, but something shared with the warrior who held her safe against him. "They're splitting up," Rising Wolf murmured as they paused in a narrow cleft. "Good, my false trails work." Sarah heard the pride in his voice and found herself sharing it. "What else did your father teach you?" "Many things. How to read the stars, how to speak with spirits." He guided their horse through a treacherous scree slope. "How to honor the old ways while walking new paths." "Like helping an enemy?" "Are you my enemy, Sarah of Virginia?" The question hung between them as they emerged onto a high ridge. Below, the land spread out like a painted map. Sarah saw how Rising Wolf had led them in a great circle, doubling back across their own trail in ways that would confuse their pursuers. "No," she said finally, "I don't think I am." A shot cracked across the distance. Rising Wolf wheeled their horse as a bullet sparked off stone nearby. 3 riders had appeared on a parallel ridge, too far for accurate shooting but close enough to track them. "Hold tight," Rising Wolf commanded, and Sarah felt his muscles tense as he prepared their mount for desperate flight. They plunged down paths that Sarah would have sworn couldn't support a horse. Rising Wolf's skill and their mounts. Sure feet their only defense against disaster. The pursuit continued, but their lead slowly grew. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they finally lost the last echoes of pursuit in a deep canyon. Rising Wolf found them a sheltered spot near a spring where they could rest their exhausted horse. Sarah helped him check the horse for signs of strain, her hands sure on the animal's legs. At his questioning look, she explained, "I grew up around horses. Some things are the same no matter which world you're from." Rising Wolf nodded, a new respect in his eyes. "You learn quickly. You will need to if we are to survive." "We will." "Survive," Sarah said with surprising conviction, "and we'll find that new path you spoke of." The tracking totem in Rising Wolf's medicine pouch seemed to pulse with meaning. Two peoples, two worlds, coming together in ways no one could have predicted. Perhaps this was what the spirits had been trying to tell him all along. The carved walking stick hadn't been meant as a gift. Rising Wolf had cut it quickly from a riverside cottonwood, intending it only to help Sarah keep her footing on the treacherous banks. But as she gripped the smooth wood, testing its balance, the simple tool became something more, a symbol of her growing strength in this harsh new world. The river churned before them, swollen with spring melt from distant mountains. Its roar filled the air, drowning out softer sounds that might have warned of pursuit. Rising Wolf stood at the water's edge, reading the currents with practiced eyes. "We must cross," he said finally. "They will expect us to follow the bank." Sarah leaned on her new staff, studying the angry water. "Can the horse manage it?" "If we choose the right path." He pointed to a series of shallow rapids. "There. The water breaks white over rocks. That means solid footing beneath. Unless the rocks are slick with river moss." At his surprised look, Sarah explained, "We had a creek on our Virginia farm. I learned its moods the hard way." Rising Wolf nodded slowly. "You have river wisdom. Good. We will need it." They worked together to redistribute their meager supplies, tying everything high on the horse's back. Sarah watched Rising Wolf whisper something in Comanche to the animal, stroking its nose. The horse's ears flicked forward, as if understanding. "A prayer?" she asked. "A promise that I will not lead him wrong." Rising Wolf's hand went to his medicine pouch. "Many spirits dwell in rivers. It is wise to respect them." Sarah thought of the Bible's crossing of the Jordan, of baptism and renewal. Perhaps their peoples weren't so different in their reverence for water's power. They entered the river carefully, Rising Wolf leading the horse while Sarah kept herself steady with her staff. The first steps weren't bad, but as they moved deeper, the current tugged at them with growing strength. "Keep moving," Rising Wolf called over the water's voice. "Do not let the river think too long about carrying you away." Sarah fought for each step, grateful for the walking stick's support. The horse snorted nervously, but followed Rising Wolf's guidance. Halfway across, the water reached Sarah's waist, its cold bite stealing her breath. A sudden surge caught her. Off balance, the staff slid on slick stone, and for a heart-stopping moment Sarah felt herself falling. Then Rising Wolf's hand locked around her arm, strong as iron. "I have you," he said, and she believed him. Together they found new footing. The horse crowded close, offering additional support against the current. Step by careful step, they made their way toward the far bank. When they finally climbed out, soaked and shivering, Sarah found herself laughing. Rising Wolf looked at her questioningly. "A week ago," she explained, "I was a proper Virginia lady who never set foot outdoors without a bonnet. Now look at me. I see a woman as strong as the river," he said simply. Sarah felt her cheeks warm despite her sodden clothes. She gripped the walking stick tighter, its smooth wood now familiar in her palm. "Thank you for this." She raised the staff slightly. "And for everything." Rising Wolf busied himself checking their supplies. "We should make camp, dry ourselves before night comes." He glanced back across the river. "The water will hide our trail, but they will find places to cross. We have bought time, nothing more." They found shelter in a grove of cottonwoods, the same pale wood as Sarah's staff. As they set up camp, she found herself moving with new confidence, no longer the helpless captive she'd been just days ago. "Will you teach me more?" she asked as they sat beside their small fire. "About reading the land, I mean. If we're going. To survive, I need to learn." Rising Wolf studied her for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally, "and perhaps you will teach me of your world as well. A bridge must be built from both sides." Sarah ran her fingers along the walking stick's smooth length, feeling the grain of the wood. Like her, it had been transformed by water and necessity, made stronger without being broken. Perhaps that was a lesson worth learning. The ancient pictographs stretched across the canyon wall in faded ochre and white, telling stories that predated both their peoples. Sarah stood before them in the gathering dusk, transfixed by handprints pressed against stone generations ago. Rising Wolf watched her reaction carefully, seeing his own reverence for this place reflected in her eyes. "Your people didn't make these," Sarah said softly. "It wasn't a question. No, the ancient ones walked here long before Comanche, before white man." Rising Wolf touched one of the painted figures gently. "This is sacred ground. Even Black Horse will hesitate to follow us here." The narrow valley felt older than time itself, its walls decorated with dancers, hunters, and strange, spiraling symbols. Their small fire cast flickering shadows that made the ancient art seem to move, as if the spirits of their creators still dwelled in the stone. "What do they mean?" Sarah asked, tracing the air above a line of deer following a human figure. "Many. And things, the cycle of seasons, the journey of souls." Rising Wolf's voice took on the cadence of a storyteller. "My grandfather said these were messages left by the first people, teaching us how to live in harmony with the land." Sarah thought of her own family's Bible, its pages filled with ancient wisdom passed down through generations. "We all need our sacred stories," she said. Rising Wolf nodded. "The stories remind us who we are, who we can be." He hesitated, then added, "My sister loved this place. She would come here to pray for peace between our peoples." "Tell me about her?" Sarah settled beside the fire, wrapping her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Rising, Wolf touched his medicine pouch, gathering his thoughts. Morning Star was different. She learned the white man's language in secret, dreamed of building bridges between our worlds. Pain flickered across his features. The warriors called her foolish, but she saw what was coming, that the old ways of war would only lead to destruction. What happened to her? Soldiers came to our winter camp. There had been raids, not our band, but they didn't care. His hands clenched. Morning Star tried to speak to them, to explain. They shot her where she stood, hands raised in peace. Sarah's heart ached for the grief in his voice. "And yet you still believe in her dream?" More than ever. He met her, eyes across the fire. "The world is changing, Sarah. We must change with it, or die holding to old hatreds." The pictographs watched them silently, their ancient wisdom offering no easy answers. Sarah found herself studying Rising Wolf's face in the firelight, seeing past the surface differences that had once seemed so important. His strength was undeniable, but it was his gentleness that moved her, the way he cared for their horse, his reverence for this sacred place, his sister's dream living on in his heart. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about what you said at the river, about building bridges from both sides." Rising Wolf waited, giving her space to find her words. "My whole life I was taught that your people were savages, but I've seen more nobility in you these past days than in many so-called civilized men." She touched her mother's cameo. Perhaps we're all just people trying to find our way." The ancient ones would agree. Rising Wolf gestured to the pictographs. "See how they drew all people the same. No tribe marks, no differences, just souls on a journey." A night bird called from somewhere in the darkness, its cry echoing off the canyon walls. Sarah shivered, but not from cold. "This place feels Alive, she whispered. It is, with memories, with dreams. Rising Wolf added a small branch to their fire. The spirits are strong here. Perhaps they led us to this valley for a reason. Sarah thought of all that had brought them to this moment. Violence and loss, courage and compassion, choices that had seemed impossible but proved transformative. The pictographs seemed to pulse with meaning in the firelight, ancient hands reaching across time to touch their hearts. Your sister was right, she said finally. There has to be another way. Rising Wolf's eyes met hers, holding something deeper than mere understanding. In this sacred valley, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, the last barriers between them began to crumble like ancient stone returning to sand. Thunder rolled across the prairie like distant war drums. As Rising Wolf led them toward a limestone cave he remembered from his hunting days. The shared blanket around their shoulders was their only defense against the first stinging drops of rain, its rough wool already heavy with moisture. "The horse?" Sarah asked through chattering teeth as they reached the cave's mouth. "There is space enough." Rising Wolf guided their mount into the shelter. "He has weathered worse storms." The cave opened like a throat into the hillside, deep. Enough to protect them from the elements, but not so deep as to harbor larger predators. As Rising Wolf worked to start a fire with their dwindling dry tinder, Sarah tried to wring water from her sodden skirts. "Here." Rising Wolf offered her the blanket they'd been sharing. "You need it more." Sarah hesitated. "We could share it. For warmth." The words hung between them as lightning illuminated the cave entrance. Rising Wolf's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sarah saw something flicker in his eyes. "That would be wise," he said finally. "For survival." They settled beside the small fire, the blanket drawn around both their shoulders. Sarah was acutely aware of Rising Wolf's presence, the solid warmth of him, the way his arm brushed hers as he fed branches to the flames. Outside, the storm raged with growing fury. "Reminds me of Virginia thunderstorms," Sarah said, trying to fill the charged silence. "We'd sit on the porch and watch nature's fury. My father called it God's light show. My people say storms are the Sky Father speaking to Earth Mother." Rising Wolf's voice was thoughtful, sometimes in anger, sometimes in love. Sarah found herself leaning slightly against him, drawn by his warmth and the rumble of his voice. "Which is this storm, do you think?" "Perhaps both. Like all great powers, they fight and love with equal passion." Another crack of thunder punctuated his words. Sarah jumped, and Rising Wolf's arm instinctively tightened around her. Neither of them moved to break the contact. "Tell me more," Sarah said softly, "about your stories, your beliefs." Rising Wolf was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "We believe everything has spirit. Rocks, trees, animals. All connected, all part of the great circle of life." His free hand touched his medicine pouch. "When we take from the land, we give thanks. When we fight, we honor our enemy's courage. Is that why you saved me, to honor my husband's courage?" "At first, perhaps." Rising Wolf turned slightly to face her. "Now." Sarah's heart quickened at the intensity in his gaze. Now I see. What my sister saw. The possibility of something new, something better than endless war and hatred." Lightning flashed again, illuminating their faces in stark relief. Sarah was suddenly very aware of how close they were, how easy it would be to bridge the small distance between them. "What will your people think?" she whispered. "If they knew you were here, with me, they would call me betrayer, cast me out." His voice held no regret. "And yours? They would never understand." Sarah's hand found his beneath the blanket. "But I'm beginning to think understanding comes only when we stop listening to what others tell us to believe." Rising Wolf's fingers intertwined with hers, strong and calloused. "There will be no going back, for either of us." "I know." Sarah thought of her old life, the proper Virginia lady she'd been, the settler's wife she'd become. Those versions of herself seemed to belong to another woman entirely. Maybe some paths only appear when we're brave enough to leave the familiar trail. The storm's fury began to ease, thunder growing more distant, but neither of them moved to break their connection. The shared blanket had become a world of its own, where the divisions between their peoples didn't exist. "Tomorrow will bring its own challenges," Rising Wolf said finally. "The pursuit continues. The world beyond this cave remains unchanged." "We've changed," Sarah replied. "Perhaps that's enough to begin with." As if in answer, a final rumble of thunder echoed through the hills. Their fire had burned low, casting soft shadows that blurred the boundaries between them. Sarah felt the last of her reserves crumbling, the proper distance she'd tried to maintain, the walls of propriety and prejudice. Rising Wolf must have sensed the shift in her because his free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "Sarah." Her name on his lips was both question and answer. As the storm swept away to the east, Sarah Mitchell chose her new path, knowing it would transform them both forever. Sarah watched as Rising Wolf carefully laid out his medicinal plants on a flat stone, each leaf, root, and flower a different shade of green and brown against the grey rock. The gash in her leg throbbed with every heartbeat, blood seeping through the makeshift bandage torn from her petticoat. "It was foolish to try that climb," she said through gritted teeth. "It was brave," Rising Wolf corrected, sorting through his medicines. "You almost made it." The steep shortcut had seemed manageable until the loose shale gave way beneath her feet. Now they were forced to make camp in this exposed position, while Rising Wolf tended her wound. "My father would have stitched it," Sarah said, thinking of his doctor's bag with its neat rows of catgut sutures. "There are other ways to heal." Rising Wolf selected several plants, beginning to grind them between two smooth stones. "The Earth Mother provides, if we know how to listen." Sarah watched his sure movements, the quiet confidence in his hands. "What are they?" "This." He held up a dried purple flower. "Echinacea. Prevents fever. A thick root. Comfrey. For knitting. Flesh. Green leaves. Yarrow to stop bleeding." The familiar names surprised her. "I know some of these. My mother's garden." All mothers know healing plants. Rising Wolf mixed the ground herbs with water from his canteen. "The knowledge is as old as people." He knelt beside her, gently unwrapping the blood-stained cloth from her leg. The cut was ugly, but clean, running along her calf, where the sharp shale had sliced through her skirt. "This will hurt," he warned, holding up the herbal poultice. Sarah nodded, bracing herself. When he applied the medicine, the pain was sharp, but quickly faded to a cooling numbness. She watched in fascination as he bound the wound with strips of soft deerskin. "Your sister taught you this?" she asked, remembering his stories of Morning Star. "Some, but mostly my grandmother." His hands were gentle but sure as he worked. "She was our band's medicine woman. Said I had the gift, but..." He shrugged. "Warriors were not supposed to learn women's medicine. And yet you did. Knowledge is knowledge. Pride helps no one." He secured the bandage. "How does it feel?" "Better." Sarah flexed her foot carefully. "The pain is less." Rising Wolf sat back on his heels, studying her face. "You trust my medicine?" "I trust you." The words came easily now, though they would have seemed impossible just days ago. He began gathering the remaining herbs, returning them to a small deerskin pouch. Sarah noticed how he thanked each plant in his own language before putting it away. "Will you teach me?" she asked suddenly. "About the plants, I mean. If we're going to..." She hesitated, unsure how to define what they were becoming. "If we are going to build a life between worlds," Rising Wolf finished for her, "then you should know both kinds of medicine." The idea of a shared future hung between them, as tangible as the herb's sharp scent. Sarah thought of the previous night in the cave, of boundaries crossed and new paths chosen. "Does it bother you?" she asked quietly. "Being with a white woman?" Rising Wolf was silent for a long moment, his hands still moving over his medicines. "I see no white woman," he said finally. "I see Sarah, who is brave and strong and beautiful." His eyes met hers. "Who makes me forget what I was taught to believe." Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks that had nothing to do with her injury. "Even if it means leaving your people." "I left them the moment I chose to help you." He touched his medicine pouch. "But perhaps we will make a new people, one that remembers the old ways while walking new paths." A hawk circled overhead, its cry carrying on the wind. Rising Wolf watched it, reading omens in its flight. "The spirits approve," he said softly. "They see what is in our hearts." Sarah reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. His skin was darker than hers, marked with old scars and the calluses of a warrior's life, yet their hands fit perfectly, as if shaped for each other. "Then let them see," she whispered. "I'm not afraid anymore." Rising, Wolf brought their joined, hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was courtly, almost European, yet completely his own. Like the healing plants, it was a bridge between worlds, medicine for wounds deeper than flesh. The warrior's feather in Rising Wolf's hair caught the morning light, its eagle plume marking him as a man of status among the Kiowa camp they'd stumbled upon. Sarah watched from the edge of the settlement as he spoke with the tribal elders, his bearing proud but cautious. She could read the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand stayed close to his knife. The Kiowa had discovered them at dawn, a hunting party that could have been hostile, but instead recognized Rising Wolf from past trading encounters. Now, they were caught in the complex web of tribal politics and obligations, their private world suddenly exposed to others' judgment. Small children peeked at Sarah from behind their mother's skirts, pointing and whispering. The women themselves kept their distance, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. Sarah felt every inch the outsider, even her attempts to sit modestly on the ground, marking her as foreign. An elderly woman approached, her face deeply lined with age and wisdom. In her hands she carried a clay pot of something steaming. "Drink," she said in heavily accented English. "Good medicine." Sarah accepted the vessel carefully, inhaling the unfamiliar aroma of herbs. The old woman, White Leaf, they called her. Earl settled beside her with the fluid grace of long practice. "You carry his medicine pouch," White Leaf observed, nodding toward the small bag Rising Wolf had given Sarah for safekeeping. "He trusts you with sacred things." "Yes." Sarah kept her, voice low, matching the elder's tone. "He's teaching me the ways of healing." White Leaf's eyes crinkled. Teaching or learning together? Before Sarah could respond, a commotion rose from the meeting circle. Rising, Wolf stood facing a younger warrior who gesticulated angrily, speaking rapid Kiowa. Though Sarah couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear in the hostile glances thrown her way. "Some wounds heal harder than others," Whiteleaf said softly. "The memory of blood runs deep." Sarah watched as Rising Wolf responded to the young warrior, his voice calm but firm. The eagle feather in his hair shifted in the breeze, a symbol of both his status and his burden. Every eye in the camp was fixed on the confrontation. "Will they fight?" Sarah asked, her heart racing. "No." Whiteleaf touched the clay pot in Sarah's hands. "Look at your medicine. See how it changes." Sarah glanced down. The steam from the brew had begun forming unusual patterns, swirling and dancing in the morning light. "Life is like the steam," Whiteleaf continued. "It follows paths we cannot see, makes patterns we do not expect." She pointed to where Rising Wolf now clasped arms with the younger warrior, their argument settled. "Sometimes the strongest medicine comes from what we think will poison us." Rising Wolf made his way back to them, the eagle feather still proud. In his hair, despite the weight of judgment around them, he nodded respectfully to Whiteleaf before settling beside Sarah. "We can stay one night," he said quietly. "They will respect guest rights, but no longer." "The young one?" Sarah began. "Angry snake. He lost family to white settlers." Rising Wolf's hand found hers, hidden in the folds of her skirt. but he will not break peace. White Leaf watched their subtle interaction with knowing eyes. The eagle feather suits you still, young warrior. You see far, like the bird who gave it. I see a future others cannot yet understand, Rising Wolf replied. The future is always strange to old eyes. White Leaf rose with fluid grace. But the spirits know their own path. Who are we to question? As she walked away, Sarah felt some of the camp's hostility soften. White Leaf's acceptance carried weight. She could see it in the way other women began approaching, offering food and careful conversation. Your medicine woman is wise, Sarah murmured to Rising Wolf. She was my grandmother's friend. They shared healing secrets. He touched the eagle feather lightly. She gave me this when I earned my warrior name, said I would need its guidance. One day, Sarah studied the proud line of his profile, the feather that marked him as both a warrior and a man of vision. Are you sure about this path we're on? Rising Wolf turned to her, his eyes holding the same certainty she'd seen when he first freed her from her bonds. The eagle flies between earth and sky, belonging to both but claimed by neither. Perhaps that is our destiny too. Around them, the Kiowa camp continued its daily life. Women cooking, children playing, men tending horses. They were both part of it and apart from it, like the steam rising from White Leaf's medicine pot, following its own mysterious pattern toward the sky. The newspaper scrap fluttered in Sarah's trembling hands, its yellowed edges crumbling. They'd found it at an abandoned way station, left behind by travelers who'd passed through days or weeks before. The headline glared up at her in bold type. Savage massacre of peaceful settlers, but it was the smaller story below that caught her eye. Military response demanded after native raids. These settlers, Rising Wolf said quietly, reading over her shoulder. They were not peaceful. Sarah looked up sharply. How do you know? Because I know the place they speak of. The settlers there. He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. They poisoned a waterhole. Many of our children died. Sarah felt sick. The newspaper painted a simple picture of unprovoked native violence. But she was learning that nothing about this conflict was simple. Why didn't they report that part? Truth depends on who tells the story. Rising Wolf touched the paper gently. Your people see savage raiders. My people see defenders of our land. Who is right? Sarah stared at the article, seeing it with new eyes. How many other stories had been twisted? How many atrocities justified on both sides? The neat lines between good and evil that she'd been raised with were blurring more each day. There was a massacre near here last spring, she said slowly. The pastor called it God's judgment on the heathens. But now I wonder if God takes sides. Rising Wolf's voice held no judgment. If anyone's hands are clean in all this. Sarah let the paper fall. Even Thomas, he talked about clearing the land as if no one lived here before us. Rising Wolf was quiet for a long moment. My first raid, I killed a settler man. He begged for mercy in English. I didn't understand the words then, but I remember his eyes. He met Sarah's gaze. Now I understand too much. Sarah thought of her own transformation, from proper Virginia lady to settler's wife, to whatever she was becoming now. Each step had stripped away another layer of comfortable certainty. What do? She asked. When everything we believe turns out to be a story told by others, Rising Wolf finished. We tell our own story. He picked up the newspaper, studying it. These words have power. They shape how people think, what they believe is true. Like the pictographs in the Sacred Valley, Sarah mused. Each generation leaving its mark, telling its version of history. Yes, Rising Wolf folded the paper carefully. But pictographs show all sides of the story. The hunt and the hunted. The victory and the loss. The whole circle of life. Sarah thought of her father's library back in Virginia, filled with books that told only one side of history. Maybe that's what's missing. The whole circle, all the voices. It is harder to hate what you understand, Rising Wolf agreed. My sister used to say, he broke off suddenly, head tilting. Sarah had learned to read his signals and fell silent immediately. A moment later, she heard it too. Horses approaching. They moved quickly to conceal themselves, but it was only a small group of travelers passing by the way station. Through a gap in the wall, Sarah could see them. A family in a wagon, headed west with all their worldly possessions. They look like Thomas and me, she whispered. So sure they're following God's plan, claiming empty land. The land is never empty. Rising Wolf's voice was soft. But perhaps they can learn, as you have. Sarah watched the wagon disappear into the distance, thinking of all the others following the same trail west, each one carrying their own stories, their own truths, their own justifications. If we survive this, she said carefully, if we find a place for ourselves, could we do something, help others understand? Rising, Wolf touched his medicine pouch, where he kept both healing herbs and the warrior's feather, symbols of life and death, peace and war. It is dangerous to stand between worlds. We already do. Sarah took his hand. Maybe that's where we're meant to be, on the bridge between stories. Outside, dust from the passing wagon hung in the air, mingling with the ancient dust of native. Trails, like their own lives now, impossible to separate, impossible to return to their original state. All they could do was move forward, carrying the truth they'd found together. The two paths pendant hung between them, its silver surface catching the firelight. Rising, Wolf had traded his last good knife for it at the Mexican trading post they'd cautiously approached at dusk. The craftsman had created it from an old Spanish coin, carefully working the metal into the shape of two intertwined paths that formed a heart. A choice must be made, Rising Wolf said quietly. The trading postmaster says there's a settlement 3 days' ride east. People there who would help you return to your own kind. Sarah's fingers traced the pendant's flowing lines. My own kind? She repeated softly. I'm not sure I know who they are anymore. The trading post had been a harsh reminder of the world beyond their private journey. The way the traders had looked at them, disgust barely hidden behind false smiles, had made their difficult position clear. They were neither fully of one world nor the other. You could have a life there, Rising Wolf continued, though each word seemed to cost him. Safety, respectability, perhaps even stop. Sarah closed her hand around the pendant. Is that what you want? What I want. He looked away, into the darkness beyond their fire. What I want may destroy you. You've seen how others look at us. It will always be so. Sarah thought of the trading post owner's wife, how she'd drawn her skirts aside when Sarah passed, as if impurity were contagious. The hatred in her eyes had been worse than anything she'd seen in the Kiowa camp. Tell me about the other path, she said. Rising Wolf's hand went to his medicine pouch. There are places, territories where the lines blur. Trading posts, free settlements, places where a man and woman might live according to their own hearts. He paused. But it would be a hard life. No real home, no people to call our own. We would be our own people. Sarah held up the pendant, letting it spin slowly. Like this, two paths becoming one. The pursuit would not end, he warned. Black Horse's hatred will not die easily. Then we'll go further. Mexico, maybe, or north to the territories where boundaries mean less. She moved closer to him, letting the pendant fall against her chest. Unless you're trying to tell me you don't want... His kiss cut off her words, fierce and certain. When they finally parted, his eyes held the same intensity she'd seen the night he'd freed her from her bonds. I want, he said roughly, what I have no right to want. Rights! Sarah touched his cheek. Who decides those, Rising Wolf? The same people who write newspapers about savage massacres, the ones who poison waterholes and call it progress. He caught her hand, pressing it against his face. You would. Leave everything, your people, your faith? My faith, Sarah smiled slightly. My God made all people in his image. Perhaps he's larger than the box we've put him in. She touched his medicine pouch. Perhaps he speaks through your spirits too. Wolf howled in the distance, its cry echoing off the hills. Rising Wolf listened, reading omens in the sound. "The wolf calls to its mate," he said finally, not caring what color its fur might be. Nature's wisdom. Sarah lifted the pendant from her neck, holding it between them. Two paths. But we've already chosen, haven't we? We chose the moment you cut my bonds, the moment I trusted you, the moment we first kissed. Everything since has just been accepting what's already in our hearts. Rising Wolf took the pendant, studying its intricate design. Among my people, when a warrior takes a wife, he gives her a gift to show his intentions. He looked up, meeting her eyes. "I have no other gift to give." Sarah's heart quickened. "Are you asking?" "I'm asking you to walk a hard path with me, to help me build something new. Not Comanche, not white, but ours." He held out the pendant. "I'm asking you to be brave enough to love beyond boundaries." Sarah took the pendant, but kept hold of his hand. "Yes," she said simply. He pulled her close, and they sat together watching the fire burn low. The pendant, pressed between their clasped hands, no longer two paths but one. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, pursuit and prejudice, hardship and hope. But tonight, under the vast Texas sky, they had chosen their future, a future that would demand everything they had, but offer something precious in return. The chance to prove that love could bridge the deepest divisions, that two people could choose to become something entirely new. The ceremonial drum's deep voice echoed off the canyon walls, its rhythm matching the thunder of approaching hooves. Rising, Wolf held it between his knees, fingers moving across the taut hide with practiced skill. Each beat sent its message into the gathering dusk, a warrior's challenge, a call to face one's destiny. "Will they understand?" Sarah asked, checking the rifle they'd traded their last valuables to obtain. "Black Horse will." Rising Wolf's hands never stopped their rhythmic work. "The drum speaks the old language. It tells him I claim the right of single combat." Sarah's hands tightened on the rifle. "You can't face him alone." "I must." The drum's voice grew deeper, more insistent. "If I defeat him in sacred combat, the others must accept the outcome. It is the old way." They had chosen their ground carefully. A box canyon with high walls and a single approach. The ceremonial drum had been a gift from White Leaf before they left the Kiowa camp, its hollow body containing not just its sacred voice, but medicines and wisdom passed down through generations. "And if he refuses the challenge?" Rising Wolf's hands stilled on the drum. "Then we fight as we must." He looked up at her. "You remember what I taught you?" Sarah nodded. Over the past days, he had shown her how to move like a Comanche warrior, how to use the canyon's echoes to confuse pursuers, how to make every shot count. She was no longer the helpless settler's widow she had been. "I remember." She touched the two paths pendant that hung beneath her dress. "But I don't like the thought of you facing him alone. Some battles must be fought alone." Rising Wolf resumed, his drumming but softer now. "Black Horse and I, we represent two paths for our people, war or peace, hatred or understanding. The choice must be made, warrior to warrior." Sarah thought of the newspaper they'd found, of history being written by those who survived to tell it. "And if you fall, then you escape east. The settlement will take you in." "No." The word came out sharp as a rifle crack. "I didn't choose this path to walk it alone." Rising Wolf set the drum aside and rose to stand before her. In the dying light, his face held all the nobility and wisdom that had first drawn her to him. He touched her cheek with a warrior's calloused hand. "Then we must both survive," he said simply. The drum sat silent between them, its medicine waiting to be called forth. Sarah could feel the approach of their pursuers, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Tomorrow would bring blood and judgment, an ending to this chase one way or another. "Teach me the drum call," she said suddenly, "the one for challenge." Rising Wolf's eyebrows rose. "It is not for women?" Sarah kept her voice level. Like healing plants weren't for warriors. Some boundaries are meant to be crossed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. He picked up the drum and set it before her. Watch my hands. Feel the rhythm in your heart first, then let it flow to your fingers. As the moon rose, he taught her the sacred rhythms, the call to combat, the song of victory, the prayer for the fallen. Sarah's hands were clumsy at first, but gradually found their way. The drum's voice grew stronger, more confident. Good, Rising Wolf said finally. Now you know both medicines, healing and war. Is there a rhythm for peace? Sarah asked, still feeling the drum's pulse in her bones. We will make one. He took her hands in his. If we survive tomorrow, we will create new songs, new stories, songs of two peoples becoming one. In the distance, an answering drum began to beat, Black Horse's response to their challenge. The sound was angry, full of hatred and promises. Of blood. Rising Wolf listened intently. He accepts. At dawn. Sarah set the drum carefully aside and reached for him. They held each other as the moon climbed higher, casting silver light into their canyon sanctuary. No words were needed now. Everything that mattered had been said in the drum's voice, in the choices they'd made, in the future they dared to dream. Of tomorrow would bring its judgment, but tonight was theirs, blessed by the hunter's moon and witnessed by the ancient spirits of the land they both claimed as home. The broken arrow lay in the dust between them, its shaft split cleanly in two, the traditional signal that blood had been shed and honor satisfied. Black Horse's blood stained the earth where he knelt, one hand pressed to his wounded side. His eyes, dark with hatred and something like respect, never left Rising Wolf's face. Finish it, he growled in Comanche. Take your warrior's right. Dawn painted the canyon walls crimson, as Rising Wolf stood over his fallen opponent, knife still held ready. The single combat had been swift and brutal, both men fighting with the skill of seasoned warriors. But where Black Horse had fought, with blind fury, Rising Wolf had moved with the calm precision Sarah had come to know so well. There has been enough death, Rising Wolf replied, his voice carrying to where the other warriors watched from horseback. I claim a different right. Sarah stood at the canyon's mouth, rifle ready but pointed at the ground. She had watched the fight with her heart in her throat, remembering Rising Wolf's teachings about their people's combat traditions. Every move, every gesture carried meaning beyond the violence. Black Horse spat blood. You would shame me with mercy? After taking a white woman to your bed? I would honor you as a warrior, Rising Wolf answered, by showing there is strength in choosing peace. He turned to address the watching warriors. How many more must die? How many more wives will weep, mothers mourn, children grow up hungry for vengeance? He held up the broken arrow. Our people say this symbol means blood has been paid. I say it can also mean the breaking of old cycles. One of the older warriors moved his horse forward. You speak like morning star. My sister saw truly. Rising. Wolf's voice grew stronger. She saw that the future belongs not to those who cling to hatred, but to those brave enough to forge new paths. Sarah felt the shift in the watching warriors, saw how Rising Wolf's words touched something in them. These men had all lost family to settlers' guns, just as she had lost Thomas to their raids. The cycle of vengeance had scarred them all. Black Horse struggled to rise, pride warring with weakness. You betray our ways, I honor our highest ways. Rising Wolf offered his hand to his fallen opponent. The ways of wisdom over war, of vision over vengeance. For a long moment, the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Sarah's finger tensed on the rifle's trigger as Black Horse stared at the offered hand. Then, slowly, the wounded warrior reached. Up and clasped Rising Wolf's forearm. You fight with honor, Black Horse said grudgingly, and speak with your sister's heart. He looked past Rising Wolf to Sarah. Perhaps the spirits have their own wisdom. Rising Wolf helped him to his feet. Sarah moved forward with the healing plants they had prepared, knowing this moment of tending wounds could build stronger bridges than any words. As she worked to bind Black Horse's injury, using the skills Rising Wolf had taught her, she felt the warrior's gazes shift from hostility to cautious acceptance. Her sure movements with the sacred medicines spoke louder than any argument about her right to be there. "You know our ways," Black Horse observed as she applied the healing paste. "I am learning," Sarah met his eyes, "as we all must learn from each other." The sun had cleared the canyon rim by the time Black Horse's wounds were tended. The broken arrow remained where it had fallen, a symbol transformed from bloodshed to possibility. "What now?" one of the younger warriors asked. Rising Wolf stood with Sarah, his hand finding hers openly before his former companions. "Now we make a new path, one that others may follow when they are ready." Black Horse mounted his horse with help from his warriors, dignity intact despite his defeat. "The council will not be pleased. The council must see that change comes, whether they wish it or not." Rising Wolf's voice carried the weight of prophecy. "Better to shape it than be broken by it." The warriors prepared to ride, their mission transformed from pursuit to witness. Black Horse paused, looking down at the couple who had changed everything. "Morning Star would be proud," he said finally. "May your new path bring wisdom to us all." They watched the warriors ride away, the broken arrow remaining as testament to what had transpired. Sarah leaned against Rising Wolf, feeling the tension flow out of his muscles. "Will they keep their word?" she asked. "They will." He touched his medicine pouch. What happened here was sacred. Even Black Horse understands that now. Sarah knelt to pick up the broken arrow, its two halves fitting together even in their brokenness. Like them, divided but united, transformed, but undefeated. "Then let's find our new path," she said softly. "Together." The mixed beadwork caught the afternoon sun, white and blue trading beads interwoven with traditional Comanche patterns. Sarah's fingers moved steadily across the design as she sat in the doorway of their newly built cabin. The piece combined her growing skill at native craftwork with the glass beads she'd brought from her old life, much like the home itself, which merged settler construction with Comanche wisdom about the land. "The pattern grows well, Rising," Wolf said, pausing in his work to watch her hands move across the beadwork. He had been teaching her the meaning of traditional designs, while she taught him to read and write English. "It's for the baby's cradle," Sarah replied, touching her still flat stomach. They had only recently confirmed her pregnancy, but already their future felt more real, more urgent. They had chosen this place carefully, a fertile valley near enough to trading posts for commerce, but far enough from settlements to avoid unwanted attention. The land reminded Sarah of her lost Virginia home, while the surrounding hills held medicine plants and hunting grounds that Rising Wolf knew well. "A child of both worlds," Rising Wolf mused, settling beside her. "Like this home we build." The cabin exemplified their blending of traditions. Its walls were sturdy logs in the settler style, but its orientation and interior followed Comanche principles. Sarah's mother's china cups sat alongside ceremonial bowls. Herbs for healing hung from the rafters, some from her childhood garden, others from Rising Wolf's medicine ways. "I've been thinking," Sarah said, setting aside her beadwork, "about what Black Horse said before he left, about others following our path." Rising Wolf waited, giving her space to find her words. In the months since the confrontation in the canyon, they had heard rumors of other couples like themselves, people choosing love over tradition, finding ways to bridge the divide between peoples. "Perhaps we could make this place a kind of way station for others who need to find their own path between worlds." "A sanctuary," Rising Wolf said thoughtfully, "like the sacred valley with its ancient paintings." "Yes, a place to learn from both traditions." Sarah touched the two paths pendant that still hung at her throat. "We could teach what we've learned. That strength comes from understanding, not hatred." Rising Wolf's hand went to his medicine pouch, worn smooth by years of use. "It would be dangerous. Not everyone is ready for such medicine." "We've faced danger before." Sarah picked up her beadwork again, adding another line to the pattern. And now we have more reason than ever to build something that will last. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint shadows across their valley. A deer emerged from the tree line, confident enough now to graze near their home. Sarah had learned to read such signs as Rising Wolf did, messages from the land. About harmony and balance. My sister would have loved this place, Rising Wolf said finally. She always said that the future belonged to those who could walk in many worlds. Then we'll honor her vision. Sarah held up the beadwork, showing how the different styles and materials strengthened each other. Every child who comes here will learn both stories, the Settler's Bible and the Comanche medicine ways. They'll learn that truth is bigger than any one people's telling of it. Rising Wolf touched the intricate pattern she had created. Like this, each thread making the whole stronger. Exactly. Sarah leaned against him, feeling their child stir beneath her heart. We'll teach them that love is stronger than fear, that understanding is better than hatred. A big dream, Rising Wolf said softly, but his voice held pride and determination. Big enough to be worth fighting for. Sarah resumed her beading, each stitch a promise to their future. Big enough to honor all we've sacrificed to get here. The valley spread before them, rich with possibility. Their home stood as testament to what could be built when two traditions came together in harmony. As the sun began to set, Sarah thought of how far they had come from that terrible day of raids and capture. Every step of their journey had led to this, not an ending, but a beginning, a new path, created one choice at a time, marked by love stronger than prejudice and hope bigger than fear. Their child would walk that path, carrying the wisdom of both worlds in their blood and bone. The wedding blanket, draped across their shoulders, caught the morning light, its intricate design telling their story in thread and symbol. Sarah had woven it over many weeks, incorporating her mother's lace with traditional Comanche patterns. White Leaf had blessed each stage of its creation, teaching her the sacred songs that imbued the fabric with meaning and power. Now they stood together in their valley, surrounded by an unlikely gathering. On one side, traders and sympathetic settlers who had come to know them over the months. On the other, members of Rising Wolf's extended family who had chosen to accept their union, including Black Horse, his wounds long healed into wisdom. Titan blanket wrapped them both as White Leaf began the ceremony, her ancient voice strong with purpose. Today we witness not just the joining of two hearts, but of two peoples. The spirits themselves have guided this path. Sarah's hand found Rising Wolf's beneath the blanket. Her simple white dress was adorned with Comanche beadwork, while he wore a mixture of traditional garments and settler clothing. Like everything about their life together, the ceremony would bridge both worlds. The pastor from the nearest settlement stepped forward next. His initial reluctance softened by months of seeing their dedication to building something true and lasting. Marriage, he began, is a sacred covenant before God. Today, we see his love expressed in new ways, reaching across the boundaries we humans create. White Leaf nodded to him with respect before continuing her part. She held up the medicine bundle she had prepared, sage, sweetgrass, and prayers bound together. As this medicine joins different plants to make stronger healing, so these two join their strengths to make new medicine for our wounded world. The pastor held up his Bible, as God made Eve from Adam's rib, showing that we are all one flesh. So too does he remind us that love knows no color, no nation, no boundary. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as the two spiritual leaders worked together, each honoring the other's traditions while maintaining their own truth. This was what she and Rising Wolf had dreamed of. Proof that understanding was possible. The blanket that binds them, White Leaf explained to all gathered, carries the patterns of both peoples. See how the designs strengthen each other, how they make something new and beautiful together. The pastor nodded. Let their union be an example of God's infinite love, which sees beyond our human divisions to the heart within. Rising Wolf spoke, then his voice carrying across the valley. I take you, Sarah, as my wife, before both peoples and all spirits. I pledge to walk beside you on this new path we create together. He switched to Comanche, repeating the vows in his native tongue so all could understand. Sarah's voice was clear and strong as she responded, I take you, Rising Wolf, as my husband before God and all spirits. I pledge to walk beside you, building bridges between worlds with every step we take. She had learned enough Comanche to speak her vows in both languages as well. The blanket seemed to warm around them as Whiteleaf and the pastor both raised their hands in blessing. The gathered witnesses, settler and native alike, joined hands, forming a circle of hope around the couple. What the Creator has joined, the pastor intoned, let no man tear asunder. What the spirits have blessed, Whiteleaf added, let no hatred divide. Black Horse stepped forward then, surprising everyone. He held up the broken arrow from their confrontation, now bound together with sinew and decorated with eagle feathers. This arrow broke in war, but was remade in peace. Let it stand as testament to what is possible when we choose a better path. The arrow was placed beneath the wedding blanket, joining the other sacred objects that would bless their union, the Bible, the medicine pouch, the two paths pendant. Each item represented a piece of their journey, a step on the trail that had led them here. As the ceremony concluded, the sun broke through gathering clouds, painting the valley in gold. Sarah and Rising Wolf turned to face their guests, the wedding blanket a rainbow of promise around them. In Sarah's growing belly, the child stirred, a new life that would know no boundaries between peoples, no divisions in love. Two paths have become one, Whiteleaf announced. Let all who witness carry this medicine in their hearts. The gathered people cheered, a sound of hope rising from the valley, echoing off the hills that had once seen only war and hatred. Sarah and Rising Wolf held each other close beneath their blanket of two worlds, knowing that this was not an ending, but a beginning. The storyteller's journal lay open on the worn kitchen table, its pages filled with two different hands. Sarah's elegant script intertwined with Rising Wolf's carefully learned English letters. For 15 years, they had recorded their story. Here, preserving it for the future generations they had dreamed of that first day in the valley. Their daughter, Morning Star, named for the aunt she would never meet, sat reading the journal's latest entry, her fingers tracing the words, as she had since childhood. At 16, she embodied everything they had hoped for. As comfortable with Shakespeare as with sacred medicine songs, equally at home in both her hereditary worlds. Father, she called, looking up as Rising Wolf entered with herbs from the garden. Tell me again about the broken arrow. Rising Wolf smiled, settling into his chair. The years had added silver to his hair, but none of the bitterness that often came with age. Which story do you wish to hear? The one about war transformed to peace, or the one about how it became our symbol? For the valley had prospered and grown, becoming known as Broken Arrow Valley, a sanctuary where others like them could find acceptance and build new lives. The trading post they'd established had become a meeting point between cultures, where medicine and merchandise from both worlds were exchanged freely. Sarah joined them, carrying the fresh bread that still marked her mornings. Her own hair had silvered too, but her eyes held the same light that had first seen possibility instead of division. Tell her about the school, Sarah suggested, setting down the bread. About the first children who came to learn both ways. The journal's pages held those stories too, tales of settler children learning Comanche wisdom while native children studied reading and writing. Their home had grown into a place of learning where both traditions were honored and preserved. Better yet, Rising Wolf said, let her read Black Horse's last letter. Morning Star turned carefully to the precious document, written in the painstaking English that their former enemy had learned in his later years. In it, he spoke of how their example had sparked changes throughout the territories, how other Communities were beginning to find ways to bridge the old divisions. The medicine you made that day, Morningstar read aloud, was stronger than any war medicine. It healed not just wounds of the flesh, but wounds of the spirit. Sarah touched the two paths pendant that still hung at her throat. Your father was right about medicine coming in many forms, and you were right about building bridges, Rising Wolf added, taking her hand. Their daughter closed the journal gently. Around them, the house held evidence of their success. Children's voices from the schoolroom out back, the smell of healing herbs drying in the rafters, the sound of horses bringing traders from both cultures to their door. Will you teach me to make a medicine blanket like yours? Morningstar asked. For when She blushed, and her parents exchanged knowing looks. The young settler man who had been calling lately had their approval. He had studied both ways with an open heart, proving that the next generation could carry their dream forward. Of course, Sarah said. It's time those patterns were passed. On rising, Wolf touched his medicine pouch, now worn smooth by years of use. Some said our path would bring only sorrow, that we were betraying our peoples by choosing each other. And instead, Morningstar prompted, though she knew the answer. Instead, we made new medicine, he said softly. Medicine strong enough to heal old hatreds, to show a different way. Sarah opened the journal to its blank pages. There are still stories to be written, she said, still bridges to be built. Outside, the valley lay peaceful in the afternoon sun. Children played in the schoolyard, native and settler together, their laughter a promise kept, a future unfolding exactly as they had dared to dream all those years ago. The broken arrow had become a doorway, the two paths had become one, and love had proven stronger than all the barriers of history.